Stories of personal transformation. Rediscover your value and overcome the fear of feeling invisible. Laura's story. There was a time when Laura, a 60-year-old woman with a long career in the administrative sector, felt perfectly at the center of the world. Every morning at work, she would discuss with colleagues, with important projects, and with the idea that her contribution was essential. Then came retirement, a long-awaited goal yet full of unknowns. What was supposed to be a new season of life, full of freedom and opportunities, soon revealed itself to be a container of silences and empty days. The colleagues of the past, who once praised her for her competence, now seemed to almost forget about her. Even her closest friends had different rhythms and commitments. Yet Laura did not want to admit it to anyone, not even to herself, but she found herself haunted by a subtle shadow, the fear of no longer counting for anything. This fear, though common to many people who are reaching retirement age or going through a transition, takes many forms. For Laura, it was like a background noise that buzzed in her head every time she opened her eyes in the morning. She felt invisible to the world, unable to make the impact she once had. And yet, she had done nothing wrong. She had worked with dedication for decades, raised 2 children, paid the mortgage, maintained a dignified existence. But now, what would become of her talent, her organizational skills, her desire to make sense of the time left? Often at night, Laura thought of a phrase by Carl Jung. Loneliness does not come from not having people around, but from the inability to communicate the things that seem important to you. It was exactly like that. She felt surrounded by people who lived their lives at a frenetic pace, and at the same time it was as if they were handling a different, distant language. She wanted to talk about passions, about delayed dreams, about finding a role in the world, but she didn't know who to share those feelings with. It was all, "How are you?" "Good, thanks," and that was it. Inside herself, however, she felt a hunger for meaning, a desperate need to be heard, to feel useful again. One day, driven by chance, and perhaps by a certain desire to react, she decided to step out of her bubble. She went to a volunteer association in her city, a small non-profit organization that distributed hot meals to the homeless. At first, she was just curious. She wanted to see how it worked, who the volunteers were, if that reality could really become an opportunity for her. What she found struck her deeply. She saw people of all ages, young people in their early 20s and retirees like her, working side by side, willing to share smiles and efforts for the good of perfect strangers. There were no hierarchies, there were no former managers or former employees, there were just people, united by a desire to do something good. The head of the association, Maria, patiently showed her how they organized the logistics: food to collect, distribution times, volunteer shifts. Laura offered her services with some embarrassment. "Can I help too?" She heard herself asked, almost surprised by herself. She was immediately greeted with a smile. That gesture of trust awakened her from a sort of emotional lethargy. She finally saw a glimmer of hope, something concrete to hold on to. And so the fear of no longer counting for anything began to chip away. It certainly hadn't disappeared, but a small opening had formed through which fresh air was coming in. In the weeks that followed, Laura began to attend the association more regularly. She helped load vans, made lists, called supermarkets and bakeries to get supplies. She realized that she was still good at managing documents and contacts, skills she had practiced for years in a work context. Those skills, almost taken for granted, now made a difference. One more homeless man who could receive a meal, more efficient coordination for distribution. Every time people thanked her sincerely, she felt a lump in her throat, not because she was looking for applause, but because she realized that she was anything but useless. During one of her winter shifts, while she was busy serving a hot meal to a group of people in need, she stopped to talk to a man in his 60s named Jenny. From the way he held himself, you could tell that the street had not always belonged to him. In fact, Gianni had lost his job, and with it his social and family dignity. What struck Laura, however, was not his tragic story, but rather his extraordinary ability to listen. He asked her who she was, why she was there. She, in a moment of sincerity, replied, "Because I'm afraid I'm no longer worth anything, and so I try to give myself a role." Gianni smiled bitterly and said to her, "You know, value is not found in the job, nor in prestige. It's something deeper. And if you do something good, not out of duty, but by choice, you are already demonstrating your value." Those words touched her. It was as if someone was urging her to look at life from a different angle. No longer the social role as the primary source of identity, but the possibility of acting starting from empathy and the desire to contribute to the common good. For years she had told herself, "I have to earn a living and have a respectable profession," without realizing that, outside of the office, there was a whole world of possibilities. Retirement, after all, was not the end of her journey, but the beginning of a new phase in which she could dedicate herself to what she had not had time to discover before. In her free time, in fact, Laura began to cultivate a forgotten passion: painting. As a child, she loved drawing landscapes and faces. The hours of art education at school were her favorite, but later, due to the frenzy of adult life, she had relegated brushes and colors to a dusty drawer. Now, at 60 years old, she realized that the passion had never completely died. One of her old teachers, many years before, had told her, "Creativity is intelligence having fun," quoting Albert Einstein. And she understood that, in that fun, there could be a sense of rediscovered fullness. Approaching the canvas made her feel alive, capable of expressing an inner world that for too long had remained silent. Of course, volunteering and painting were not enough to completely banish the fear of no longer counting for anything. There were days when she woke up with a hint of melancholy, with the nagging feeling that everyone could go on without her. It was precisely in those moments that Viktor Frankl's maxim came to mind: "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how." Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived the concentration camps, had understood how the meaning of our existence depends on a purpose that we feel intimately. Laura often repeated these words to herself, almost as if they were a mantra to find strength and motivation. It was then that she decided to organize a small event at the neighborhood civic center. She had discovered that many of the retirees in the area were lonely and longing for a chance to meet. She suggested to the center manager that they organize a painting workshop open to anyone who wanted to try something new, without formalities and without costs. The idea was to spend an afternoon together, each with their own colors, experimenting with art as a vehicle for personal expression. A volunteer from the association offered to bring some snacks, and others said they were ready to lend a hand. This simple project, which in the past Laura would have considered too banal, now became a small, great mission, a way to offer others a space for meeting and creativity. The response was surprising. 15 people arrived, ranging in age from 65 to 80. Some had never picked up a paintbrush, others had taken drawing courses many decades before. Each, in their own way, felt a little uncertain and a little curious. Laura opened the meeting with a reflection by Fernando Pessoa, a Portuguese poet. "You always have to exaggerate. Only in this way can you reach the truth." Then she invited everyone to let go, to paint what they felt, without judgment, without having to be good in an academic sense. After some initial hesitation, an atmosphere of warm complicity was created. There was laughter, chatter, contemplative silences, and on each table small personal masterpieces took shape. Painting, in that context, was transformed into a vehicle for abandoning the feeling of being useless and for rediscovering, instead, how satisfying it was to create and share with others. At the end of the afternoon, some participants stopped to thank Laura, telling her their stories. There were those who had played the piano when they were young and had put it aside, those who wanted to try their hand at sculpture and had never found the courage, those who felt they still had a lot to pass on to their grandchildren but were ashamed of appearing intrusive. The idea of no longer counting for anything was a recurring, common fear, experienced almost as a shame. And yet, in that small space of freedom, everyone realized that usefulness does not necessarily lie in a formal role, but can take on 1,000 shades. Advice given at the right time, a smile to someone who feels lost, a creative work that inspires those who look at it. Months passed and Laura, thanks to these initiatives, began to feel part of a larger community. Volunteers sought her out for help with the administration. New friends from the painting workshop asked her to organize another meeting, or perhaps to put on a small exhibition of the works produced together. All of this was not just a matter of doing, but also of being. The simple fact of being among other people who shared interests, fears, and hopes made her feel visible again. And, as Erich Fromm wrote, the human being needs a sense of belonging, of being part of something bigger than himself. Of course, it wasn't always all sunshine and roses. At times, especially during the holidays, when her children were busy and her friends were far away, the feeling of uselessness would resurface. She would look at photos of old colleagues on social media, still busy with meetings and projects, and wonder if she had turned off prematurely. And yet, those thoughts would last less and less. Every time Laura gave in to insecurity, she would just go out, get some fresh air, head to the association, make a phone call to a friend, pick up an old paintbrush. Every little act was a reminder that said to her, "You're still here, you still matter, and you can make a difference." One day, another key moment occurred. Maria, the head of the volunteer association, asked her to become a coordinator for their food collection project. It would be a more demanding, but also more rewarding job, meeting with the merchants, defining agreements, involving the volunteers, managing the shifts. Is it too much for me? Laura wondered. She hesitated for a moment, that little voice inside her that reminded her of the hours spent at home and the moments of solitude. But then she realized how much she had changed since, a few months earlier, she had first set foot in that nonprofit organization. Now she knew the strength of her contribution, the beauty of feeling part of a mechanism that works for the greater good. She accepted the assignment, and that day, on her way home, she stopped for a moment in front of the mirror. She saw a face marked by the years, but full of a light that she had not recognized for a long time. She smiled, thinking of a phrase by Seneca, "Life is like a comedy. It is not how long it is, but how it is played that matters." She was ready to play her part to the best of her ability, without regretting the previous acts, but continuing to write the script of a new season. That same evening, instead of watching television as she often did, she picked up a notebook and wrote a symbolic letter to herself to remind her of the path she had traveled. "Dear Laura, you are stronger than I thought. You fought against the fear of no longer being worthy and found not one, but many ways to value your time, your experience, and your heart. If one day you feel invisible again, reread these lines. Remember that usefulness does not depend on the judgment of others, but on the depth with which you choose to live." Those words were simple, but sincere. Ultimately, what he truly feared was the world's indifference, the absence of purpose. But he had discovered that relevance is not measured in terms of applause or great deeds. You can be helpful by listening, by consoling, by creating a painting, by cooking a meal, by advising an inexperienced volunteer. You can be influential simply by showing a friend in need that it is never too late to start something new. The power of a kind word, or the creation of a space for sharing, can change someone's day, perhaps many. Carl Rogers, the great psychologist, argued that the individual has within himself vast resources for self-understanding and constructive self-modification. The key is to have an environment that allows them to express them. Thus, on her journey, Laura discovered that the fear of no longer counting for anything had a grain of truth, the need to feel alive, to contribute to the world in a meaningful way. That fear, however, could turn into a spur to act, to challenge one's limits, to seek out new passions. She rediscovered that life, in every season, needs a project. Whether it's volunteering, painting a new hobby, or a coordination role, what matters is to never stop putting yourself on the line and reaching out to others. If you recognize yourself in some of these dynamics and want to continue exploring the inner universes that shape our relationships, subscribe to the Soul Flame channel. Here you can find precious ideas for your personal and sentimental growth, thanks to videos that address topics such as self-esteem, empathy, and building solid relationships. If you think this video could help someone you know, don't hesitate to share it. Together we can spread a culture of authenticity and mutual respect. And in the end, perhaps that's all. The feeling of still counting for something doesn't come as a prize from the outside, but blossoms from within when we begin to take meaningful paths. As Friedrich Nietzsche said, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how." Laura had found not one, but more than one why, helping those in difficulty, expressing herself artistically, involving the community, and more generally, reminding herself that the flame of one's existence doesn't go out with the end of a job or the change of social roles. And so, one step at a time, she moved forward, no longer paralyzed by the fear of being invisible, but driven by the certainty of still having a light to give.